Well, good evening, and it's really great to be here again. So this is not my first time coming to Vernon. I think over the years that I've been an MP, this may be third, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm actually supposed to be somewhere else right now. But we had our National Caucus meeting in London, Ontario, as Cindy said, and then we were all to fan out in southwestern Ontario and have meetings like this in Hamilton, in Niagara, in London, in Windsor, and really have meetings right across that region. And but as Cindy said, we had met, and Cindy had asked if I could come to the Okanagan at some point to Vernon, and so I made the decision that I would be truant from our other tour in order to come here, because Cindy is a fantastic candidate and we have to make sure that we elect her. Yay. Those of you who know her know that she has some very strong values and high integrity, and so she is absolutely running for office for the right reason, and that's good sound public policy, that she would be representing you and your thoughts and your priorities in Ottawa and really make a difference to this area. Of course, everything's perfect here. Nothing needs to change, right? No, it's a wonderful, wonderful area, and I used to come here both as the Environment Minister and also as the Minister of Management Services. And so it is a wonderful area. But the economy is not helping in North Okanagan-Shuswap right now. And one of the things that our leader Justin Trudeau was pointing out in London, which is a city and a zone in which 10,000 full-time jobs have been lost compared with 10 years ago, even though 100,000 more people have moved into the area. So think about the concerns about jobs in the economy there. And one of the things Mr. Trudeau was pointing out is that we have had a government that has had a single focus on being an energy superpower using the oil sands product. And that's been basically the economic plan. So get rid of environmental regulations, intimidate any groups that think that there should be some good environmental assessments, audit environmental groups, and go to the United States and try and bully the President of the United States, calling it a no-brainer that he has to approve pipelines. So that's not been a very, how has that worked for our Prime Minister? Not so well. So right now we're without a plan in Canada, and so not surprisingly, the Finance Minister has put off the budget because they're scrambling. Their whole approach is falling apart. And I think that reminds us, who are liberals, and points out to those who haven't paid really attention to political life, and that's many Canadians who are focused on things closer to home. But it's good to point out that the Liberal Party had 9 consecutive surpluses in the previous government, and a thriving economy, and this government has had 7 consecutive deficits, going into number 8. And so really there haven't been conservative prime ministers who've had a good record on balancing the budget since R.B. Bennett. And so that's a long time ago. So we need a change, and we need someone who will be focusing on how to create a vibrant, diverse economy right across the country, and one that is focused on things like clean, efficient energy and manufacturing, and using those wonderful assets that we have of knowledge, of our post-secondary networks, the top researchers. I was just in London, and I went to the University of Western Ontario to have a tour of Biotron. Now, Biotron is a huge facility that is a pure research facility for environment and climate. And so it attracts top talent from all over, and it has labs where you can simulate the changing climate, and very, very sophisticated equipment that can measure metals in water. Actually, some of their experiments have been compromised by the shutting of the experimental lakes area up in northern Ontario. But it draws top talent. We have top talent in Canada. We have excellent researchers. And so we could have a thriving economy that includes manufacturing, includes exports and exporting services, goods, technologies, and we can be the inventors of the solutions to climate change and the exporters of solutions. So that's the kind of economy that I think could bring a lot of jobs into this area, because people who can choose where to live would love to live here. And some of these industries, as in southwestern Ontario, they're quite a ways from Toronto. They are in an area that has farms and has recreational areas and medium-sized towns, as this part of British Columbia does. So that's because I just came from there, I wanted to chat about that briefly. Let me ask you who here can tell me what do these countries have in common? Rwanda, Andorra, Cuba, Senegal, Ecuador, Nicaragua, Iceland, South Africa, Spain, Norway, Belgium, Netherlands, Timor, East Timor, Mexico, Angola, Argentina, Slovenia. There's a lot more. I'm just sort of jumping down here. Serbia, Guyana, Tunisia, Burundi, Lesotho, South Sudan, France, Honduras, Kazakhstan, Mauritania. What do they all have in common?
They're not in North America.
Well, you're right. They probably have a few things in common. They also have more women members of parliament than Canada does. So we rank 52nd in the world, 25% behind countries like Senegal at 43%. And so this evening is about women in leadership and how we can have more women in parliament. Why? Why does it matter? Well, it matters because in Parliament, people there are representing the community, and so that's why we need First Nations people, we need people from countries that have brought new Canadians to Canada, and we need women, ideally close to 50% women. That was one of my commitments as a candidate in the Liberal Party leadership race, was that all federal boards, commissions, agencies, cabinet would have gender equity. So a minimum of 40% women and a minimum of 40% men on the boards, and aiming to move towards that in the large corporate world as well. What does the research say? The research says that boards that have women on them, those corporations do better and make more money than boards without women. Than the companies whose boards don't have women. It's absolutely clear. There is no ambiguity about the fact that it's important to have women on corporate boards. And so we can ask ourselves, why is that? Well, I think that there's a number of reasons, and I'm not an academic on this subject, but I think that generally women do tend to talk with others as they're formulating their ideas and their decisions, and that leads to better decisions. So men have strengths as well. They tend to be decisive and make decisions more quickly, and that has its place. So that's why working together, actually, with women and men is a good formula for success. So I wanted to take just a couple of minutes and talk a bit about my own experience and path. So I'm an immigrant, came from South Africa at the age of 7. My mom was, she had 3 kids, and when she got to Canada, she decided that she wanted to pursue her dream of being an architect. So she didn't actually have an undergraduate degree, but she had 2 years in art school in Paris, and then after that, as young women did back in the late 40s and early 50s, she got married around 20, 21, had 3 kids, And when we were 5, 10, and 12, something like that, she went to UBC and worked her way to having a master's degree in architecture, the only woman student in the School of Architecture in that day, and a pioneer in some aspects of architecture in Vancouver. So when I decided to run for the nomination for provincial election, which is not something I'd been thinking about or had ever even contemplated until being asked to run. And even then it took 2 years before I said, I think I might do this. So I'll go back to that later. But when I told my mom I'm running for a nomination for the provincial government, for the provincial legislature, she said, what? You're doing? Murrays don't do that. Murrays don't toot our own horn. So she came on board though, as you and was a big enthusiast, and at 85 is still, she'll come to anything that I'm organizing. During the leadership race one time, I was sitting with my mom and we were just visiting, and I thought I would Google her grandparents, because she'd always told me about her grandmother, who was a medical doctor in Oregon. Turns out that her grandmother was the president of the Women's Suffrage Association of Oregon. The year they got, and she was there on the photo signing when they got the vote in 1912 with the governor of Oregon. So this is the woman whose family doesn't do this kind of stuff. And then as I Googled a little bit more, it turned out that her grandfather was a senator representing for the state in the state legislature. He was a mayor of about 3 different towns, and then he became a national senator representing Oregon in Washington, and was a pal of the president of that day, Teddy Roosevelt. So my mom was shocked when I told her these things, that she didn't know about her own grandparents. So, but why did she not think about, she never thought about politics as a career. It was never mentioned as something I might think about. Why do women tend not to think about that? Until someone, like in my case, Gordon Campbell, saw me at a forestry convention tearing a strip off of the Deputy Minister of Forests of the day, and came and said, why don't you run for us? And I said, because you're not green enough, Gordon. And he said, we need green people on our team. So, but it just was like somebody was saying, do you want to go on a spaceship to Mars? And so I didn't even consider it really. And then 2 years later, he asked again. And I thought, wow. And then I had just seen a notice in the paper saying women's campaign school. Turned out it was like the next day, and they have 1 seat left. And I thought, okay, I'll just do that. And that'll tell me why I'm not going into politics. And it was the opposite experience. But I think I'm not unusual in that. So I didn't think I had what it took. What do I have to offer? And it seemed to me that politicians were from Mars. I had no idea what they were like and what they did and how I could relate to them, because I'd been a businesswoman, building a business in ecosystem restoration and reforestation, and not really doing a lot, not engaged in politics. Like many families, focused on what we were trying to do and raising 3 kids at the same time, and not really thinking about the skill set that provides. So I think that's a big difference between men and women in general, not always, but if Gordon says and he mentioned this to me at one point, if he said, ask a man, would you consider running? It's like, where do I sign up? And what cabinet portfolio will I get? But for women, it's like, well, why me? Surely there's somebody that's more qualified. And I certainly had that feeling. I had an MBA, I built a business with my husband, we had already had about 1,000 seasonal workers, and we were right across the country, and I'd raised 3 kids, but it's like, what do I have to offer? So there's something and I think young women are not, I think that's changed a lot. So I'm dating myself by talking about it this way. However, the reality is that many women do choose to run, to have children first and a career first, and come into politics later in life. So it is women there's many women running for us, and there's many young women, but there's also women my age for whom it's a second career. And so perhaps our attitudes were less confident about who we are and what we could offer than the young women at the back table. And so that's shifting as we speak, and I know it is shifting, but I'm just talking about some of the institutional barriers within or without to seeking leadership positions. Because if we're going to close that gap, we've got one of two ways to do it. One is we could have proportional representation like they have in Rwanda, where they have 60% women. Or two, we have to start really understanding the institutional barriers to having equity of women in politics and start to have policies that address them. And so that's why in my leadership race I propose both of those things. Why not? In a leadership race, you get to have the whole smorgasbord in your platform if you want. As Cindy mentioned, we do have a thriving women's caucus. It includes men, but we ensure that the things that are important to us, which include the whole range of women's economic opportunities, is huge. So we make sure those are brought to the attention of our colleagues, our few colleagues in this caucus, but the Liberal Party has had large caucuses, and the Women's Caucus has been very instrumental in some of the policies in the past Liberal government. So it's a great privilege to have the job that I have and to represent people in Vancouver-Quadra. I know Cindy has every quality and qualification that would be needed to do an excellent job, and her commitment would be to be a voice for you in Ottawa, not just coming back with the talking points from someone else from somewhere else. So it's great to be back here, and I think my time is up.
Thank you very much. Just hang on, just come back up here because we're going to take 3 questions from the floor. I actually grew up in Vancouver-Quadra, so I know the riding very well.
And my high school apparently.
Yes, I was in high school. So we're going to take 3 questions for Joyce, and so those of you who are busily writing, Linda, you've got one? Go ahead.
I've got 3.
No, just one here.
Okay, the question I guess I'll put to you is, why is Justin wanting to see more women elected to government? His goal is 50% women?
Okay, so the question for those of you who didn't hear is, why does Justin want to have more women in government? Let's just call it in government and think that way. And his goal is 50%. So Joyce.
Well, he is very clear that having a great team makes for an effective prime minister. And he knows that having a great team would be essential to have great women around the cabinet table and in the caucus. So it's to be effective in understanding what is needed from women's perspective as well as men's perspective, and having capable people to help him deliver on it.
I've got another question.
Nope, sorry. We only have 3 questions, so we're going to take one from another table. How about the back table there that Joyce pointed out with some young people sitting around it? Well, you look young here. Go ahead. I can say that I've got white hair.
Young at heart.
So my question was, why do conservatives win? And why do people vote conservative? It's amazing. In this, like in the North Okanagan, we've got conservatives all over the place. I don't understand what it is that makes them vote that way. And if we did, maybe we could change it.
Good question. So if you didn't hear, why do the Conservatives win? And if we understood that, maybe we could change that.
Well, I can't put myself in the mind of a conservative voter, I'm sorry to say. I think in politics, parties after 10 years are often voted out. So there are changes and swings back and forth, and when you look at the history of Canada, that's been the case. I mean, interestingly, as I pointed out, it has been Liberal governments that have balanced the books and Conservative governments that have run up deficits. And yet, the Conservative governments appeared to have the public believing that they are the proper managers, the best managers of the economy. So there's some effective communication that are available to the Conservatives. I think the key question is more why is there such a sense that it's time for a change? I mean, why are people as enthusiastic about Justin Trudeau as they are? And why do they want to fire Stephen Harper? And I think that will change in different parts of the country, but there are some themes. And I think these themes are ways in which the Prime Minister and his team have let Canadians down. So 10 years ago, they may have had an expectation that this Prime Minister would bring some fiscal capabilities, though they were building on a very strong pattern of surpluses that the Liberals left. And in fact, I think the only surpluses that have happened under Prime Minister Harper's watch have been the residual $13 billion in surplus from the year before he came in. So what are some of those themes that make people really ready for a change? I think democracy is a big one. I mean, people want to live in a country where we respect the scientists, and we respect the researchers, we respect the voting public. So there's a number of ways in which democracy has been shrunk by this government, and I think Canadians are not going to stand for that. And there's a lot of examples of the things that I've just mentioned, so I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail. But just one example. So one part of what I do is I am the Liberal Party of Canada Critic for National Defence. So that means everything around that portfolio, which is about 10% of the federal government employees and funds, is something that I am responsible to keep on top of and comment on and try and hold the government accountable for. And so what we've seen, so this is another theme, as well as the secrecy and not being transparent and not providing information, and forcing the parliamentary budget officer to do access to information requests to be able to do his analysis for us parliamentarians, and a huge list of anti-democratic acts. There's also the just lack of caring. And think about soldiers who come back from Afghanistan with PTSD, and there's nobody at Camp Petawawa who can help them because the jobs in healthcare and mental health care that were identified in 2003, there was a set of jobs that were identified that would be needed because of the Afghanistan war, which was far more intense after 2003. So we actually need more than that many, and the government has not yet filled those positions. And think about veterans who were waiting sometimes years to get disability payments because of bureaucracy and barriers. And think of the suicides, where in the course of the Afghanistan war, there's been more lives lost to suicide than were lost in the war. So I think people are starting to question whether that's Canadian values, the lack of compassion, lack of respect, and lack of openness. And so there's some very deep values that are being that are a disconnect between this Prime Minister and the Canadian public, and I think that's why they're ready for a change.
Thanks, Joyce. And just a little add-on to that. I'll tell 10 people to vote for Cindy, you tell 10, everybody tells 10, we'll get there.
Do we have 3 questions?
We have 3 questions, so I got one over here. Sorry? Just one. There we go. Okay. Well, we're only going to do 3, but your questions will get answered. You can speak to Joyce and Cindy afterwards. We will have time, but one more from over here then, please. Go ahead.
Mine says, where do you think the tax dollars are going to come from in this province if we kill the big industry that there is here? And please be realistic.
No.
So not aware that I'm leading the charge to kill any big industry. So one of the things that I would say is we have a lot of challenges in Canada, and including in British Columbia. We have, and I would ask whether the solution to those challenges is a tax break for families like Justin's and Stephen Harper's. Because that appears to be what this Prime Minister is doing. He has emptied the cupboard with a income splitting promise that will cost the Treasury $2 billion a year. $2 billion just for the 15% of families that need it the least. And so when we think about what would get the economy going again, it's things like investing in infrastructure. And we heard that in Southern Ontario, actually, that there are real barriers to getting goods to market if you live in London, Ontario. There's real barriers because they don't have the high-speed broadband internet right across their province that we are fortunate to have in British Columbia. So it's difficult for companies to locate outside of the urban areas, and so they need infrastructure. And think about, I live in Vancouver, but Toronto and other areas where people waste an enormous amount of time in traffic jams, and it becomes a disincentive for companies to locate there. So public transit. So there's a wealth of need in infrastructure investment to get the economy going. The post-secondary education and training, very important. So those are the things that Justin is talking about. He's saying we have to get the economy going again. I'm confident that there are ways to do that. The clean energy economy is a huge potential for Canada. It's growing way faster than the oil and gas economy. And it's actually more jobs as well per kilowatt hour produced in non-fossil fuel electricity than it is in fossil fuel electricity. So there's more jobs in it. There's investment money. The investment into clean energy and efficiency is growing much faster than investment in other sectors of our economy. But this country has missed the boat. When we had a downturn, the United States invested 14 times more per capita of their stimulus funding in green and clean and efficient energy economy boosting than we did here in Canada. So we spent the money on goodness knows what, but we did not use it strategically to diversify and help transition our economy off of fossil fuels. That's what we need to do. And Justin Trudeau is very clear about that. So I am very excited at the prospects that will create for British Columbia as an exporter to the East, where they in Asia badly need these solutions, and it will be a huge boost to places like Vernon as well, to this area, the North Okanagan-Shuswap. So, thanks for the question.
Thank you very much, Joyce. You've been absolutely inspiring tonight. Right? Thank you.